back to my channel. My name is Bryan, and in this video we're going to be talking about film grain and why I use it and also why I don't use it sometimes too. Film grain is just one of those elements from an old era that just managed to make its way into the new era. And it's honestly here to stay, and it's not going to go anywhere. Film grain is a natural process that happens when you expose images onto celluloid film. It's this texture, this metallic texture that kind of comes through and looks like noise on your final shots. Over time, filmmakers and creators were able to get a little bit of control using their camera settings and how images were exposed onto the film. Also the different types of film, whether it's like 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter, the sizing of the film, and they were able to control what it actually looked like. But you could never really get rid of film grain. And there were other processes in the chemical process of exposing the film and bringing the image out, but it just never was something that you could eliminate. Filmmakers had it in their films, and over time, us as an audience, we kind of got ingrained, pun intended, with film grain on our films, and it became part of the cinematic feel. And the more that we put onto our film, the more natural it would look, as long as we had control over it. Obviously, if you overdid the film grain and the film just looked like it was made poorly in like the 50s or 60s, as color was first coming out especially, it just didn't look good. But if you had a nice balance with your film grain, it could really pop. And we see this in films today, even in digital films where grain shouldn't exist. Directors actually put grain onto their films to give it that rustic, almost old feel to it that just brings the audience into the film. Sounds weird, right? But that's the case. As a matter of fact, what we see nowadays is a lot of directors actually emphasize putting grain back into their plates just to give that texture and feel to their shots. As a VFX artist, you'll see me do that quite often too when I'm working on personal work, as it's just a great way to kind of mask some of the effects that I do and make them look a little bit more real. For instance, if you have grain on the dry plate or the clean plate and you put grain on your VFX and it matches, that's just another reason to trick the brain saying, hey, this element fits even though it's not real. So in this video, what I want to do is break down some reasons I would use film grain and why I would use film grain, when I would use film grain, using some examples that we see out in Hollywood, some of my personal work as well. So let's get started. Firstly, when I make a decision on whether I'm going to use film grain or not, it's kind of like, why am I going to use this? Is there a reason for this? If there isn't, I won't. One of the biggest things that we need to consider is if it's daytime outside, the chances of seeing grain or noise through your ISO on a digital camera, for instance, is pretty low. You're not going to increase your ISO settings outside. In fact, you're probably going to reduce it to the bare minimum and use an ND filter and your aperture, especially on a sunny day. Grain usually won't pop up, but typically grain starts to show up once we get to mid-range values and starting getting darker in low light scenarios. So that's something to consider when you want to use your grain. Another thing I want to talk about too is the fact that you need to understand your end product. Where are you going to be sending your content? If you're showing your content on, let's say, YouTube, grain doesn't really make that much sense. For instance, this video is going on YouTube, and I'm actually going to remove most of the grain from this final product of this video. There might be some left because I'm shooting in a little bit of low light, but it's important to understand that once you go to compression, which YouTube compresses our videos, that grain may not come through the way you had envisioned it. If you're going to be doing a short film or sending a feature film, or maybe you're shooting a documentary and you're throwing it out on a circuit, grain might make sense in that case, but that's because you're not going to be showing it on YouTube. Now, that's not to say that you can't put grain on YouTube. You absolutely can, but that is a sacrifice that you need to be willing to make in quality for aesthetic. One of the biggest mistakes I see with newer filmmakers and editors, they're like, oh, I just want to throw grain onto my plate, and they'll go into DaVinci or download a preset or download some overlays, and they won't actually understand the difference between 16 millimeter and let's say 35 millimeter. If you're looking for a specific feel on your footage, look up films that were shot on 35 millimeter film or 16 millimeter film, or if you're shooting something like Super 8s, look up Super 8 and see what it looks like. Don't just try and take a 35 millimeter overlay and say, hey, I'm gonna make a Super 8 style film and put it there. It doesn't work that way. Even though at first glance it may look fine, it usually isn't. And we usually have to go back and either take that overlay out and clean it up or replace the overlay, or sometimes you're just gonna get some pretty bad feedback on that. And honestly, lastly, if you're gonna use film grain, it's really in the eye of the beholder. I sometimes just don't use it, and sometimes I do. If it feels good and it feels right to put it on. For instance, this last tutorial that I did a couple weeks ago, I actually walked through putting film grain on because of how low light it was, and I wanted grain, this little textured feel. Another big reason why I'll use film grain in that situation, for instance, is because I have some stepping in my 8-bit footage. Even though I was color grading in 16-bit, the output was going to be in 8-bit. And when you go to 8-bit, sometimes you're going to get banding, you're going to get artifacting, and in order to help with the dither on that, you can throw film grain to give that nice smooth look. It's a way to trick the brain and the eyes into saying, hey, this is a smooth gradient because there's already noise there. And that's something that you're going to have to explore for yourself. If you want to learn more about film grain, here's some excellent resources that have helped me over the years. And the biggest advice I can give you is just to go and shoot and experiment. The more you shoot, the more you're going to learn. And I think it's so important as filmmakers, videographers, or even graphic designers or VFX artists that we go and do, and we consistently put our product out there. So one, we can give feedback, but also we can understand where we are growing and where we need to grow. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you like using film grain, or do you want to learn how to use film grain more? Maybe I could put some tutorials up on this channel. If you like this video, please be sure to like, head over to my channel and check out some of the content that I've been uploading. I'll be uploading more content here in the near future. And don't forget to smash that bell icon so you know when new videos go live. And I'll see you in the next video.